Real people, real crimes, real life drama.
In the mid-1980s, a young funeral home director named Bernie Tiede came to the little East Texas town of Carthage.
It's beautiful, yes. I love the people here in Carthage.
Carthage is just a small town of 6,000 people. A lot of people got very wealthy on oil and gas. There's a lot of little widows in town who have a lot of money, none more so than Mrs. Marjorie Nugent.
Bernie Tiede was running a con on my grandmother.
He picked up a gun, shot her 4 times in the back, and then he buried her in her own deep freeze.
My name is Bernie Tiede. You may have heard about me.
This is my story.
They did a movie about me called Bernie.
Jack Black was going to play you?
Yes.
Richard Linklater is my favorite filmmaker I've ever worked with.
All right, cut.
I'm Rick Linklater, and I directed the movie Bernie. There was something about this story that stayed with me, and I think it was that relationship, the Miss Nugent-Bernie relationship.
And the Bernie Tiede that you know, is he a good man?
He's the sweetest guy. You know, he's a great man.
Very complex character. Is that part of what attracted you to this film?
The thing about playing Bernie is that he's lovable, and it's really important to Bernie that he be loved. Perfect submission. And I can relate to that. Visions of right. I have a little bit of that in me too.
You know, this would be funny if it wasn't so damn sad.
Apparently, Marjorie was tough.
She was vile and hateful and just mean. Yo, wave hi. Hello.
She was very loving. I miss her. Bernie stole $3.8 million from my grandmother, and then he put 4 bullets in her back at close range.
How did this happen? And that was what the movie explored.
She didn't have a lot of friends. She didn't have a lot of people around her to take care of her and to love her. And that's where Bernie came in.
Did she ever look at you, Bernie, and say, Bernie, I love you?
Well, we often told each other that, yes.
She was a wonderful woman and didn't deserve to be executed by Bernie Tiede.
I have to live with this every day of my life, and I don't like that.
I think the film is asking the question, can the nicest person in the world
I don't like thinking ill of Marjorie.
be capable of the worst act?
Let's go back and start the Bernie story from the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
Well, right here in East Texas.
One way or another, Bernie Tiede has been dealing with death and darkness since he was 3 years old.
My daddy and my mother, they had a car accident, and my mother was riding in the passenger side of the car, and Daddy never forgave himself for that.
His mother dead, his father started drinking hard and died when Bernie was just 15.
So a lot of death had occurred in our family.
Things only got worse for Bernie. He claims he was molested by his own uncle, Elmer Doucette.
12, when my uncle began molesting me.
Doucette has always denied Bernie's allegations.
Did it darken your world in some way?
Yes, it did.
Bernie learned firsthand that the wounded, lonely, and those the dead leave behind need comforting.
This was Bernie Tiede's world.
I guess you could say that's true, yeah.
Carlton Schamberger is the owner of Hawthorne Funeral Home, where Bernie worked for 9 years.
He was very successful here at Hawthorne's and as a funeral director overall.
He could do everything.
He could. He was talented, could do everything from makeup, hair. He could sing, he could preach.
Even out coloration, then apply highlights.
It would just be part of what inspired director Richard Linklater and actor Jack Black to collaborate on the darkly comic movie Bernie.
Too much color does not make one look more alive.
He was on a lot of people's lists to literally sing them to heaven.
He knew how to take care of families.
He could connect that quickly.
He could connect, yeah, exactly.
So it wasn't long after 27-year-old Bernie arrived in Carthage back in 1985 that everyone seemed to know him, from the dusty dirt roads.
One of his excellent qualities was he was a gourmet cook.
Where Jack Payne and Ira Bounds live.
I think that he was well thought of amongst the little old ladies in town.
And at Comer's famous barbecue.
He taught our Sunday school. He preached a funeral for us.
Even down at the courthouse.
Did you know Bernie Tita?
Yes.
Where local legend District Attorney Danny Buck Davidson ruled back then and still rules today, everyone sensed something good had come to town.
You think, gee, I'm glad this guy came here. He's an asset to the community. Everybody loved Barney.
I come to the garden alone. Well, I enjoyed singing in the choir. And then I got active also in the school here in the drama department. I was acting and doing in plays.
And you were oftentimes the star?
Oftentimes, yes.
Did you feel loved in this community?
Very much so. I felt very much loved.
Local ladies, Lisa and Susie Cockrell, sum it up simply.
He was a god. He was a god to this
almost. I mean, almost. People really saw him like that.
Yeah.
He's got a warmth, got a magnetism.
Just a super generous, sensitive guy, and is everybody's best friend.
Bernie Tita always had that human touch. He knew just what to say to bring a smile to anyone who needed it. So when a grieving, vulnerable widow came here to the Hawthorne Funeral Home, Bernie saw an opportunity to do what he did best.
In 1990, the town's leading banker and oilman, Rod Nugent, hard-nosed, tough, but fair businessman, dies.
Skip Hollingsworth covered the case for Texas Monthly Magazine.
And Bernie is in charge of his funeral.
I embalmed his body and got him ready for the funeral.
And Mrs. Nugent arrives.
And I met with her about the arrangements.
Marjorie Nugent would one day be portrayed by Oscar-winning actress Shirley MacLaine.
I saw her to the gravesite. We had the funeral service there, and then I took her back to the car.
Are you thinking to yourself, well, we've parted ways, we did some business, and never shall meet again?
Well, no, because that's not how I conduct funerals, as I often do with the widows, widowers. Check on them, go by the house, make sure they're all right.
Did they appreciate your dropping by?
Oh, very much so.
Wanted you to know that I was thinking about you.
Oh, thank you.
These times can be hard.
Well, Margie wasn't a huggy type person.
Ruth Cockrell would come to know as much as anyone in Carthage about the friendship of Bernie and Marjorie.
Well, we were first cousins.
Were you guys close?
We got pretty close.
Could Marjorie be difficult?
I think any of us can be difficult. I'm mean as an old setting hen sometimes.
In small towns anywhere, your reputation is not often defined by who you are, it's by what people think of you. And so the reputation did get around that Mrs. Nugent could be cantankerous.
Could Marjorie be mean?
Yes, sir. She could.
And another thing, newly widowed 74-year-old Marjorie Nugent was loaded with cash.
She would kind of be called a blue blood.
As much as $6 million.
Some soaps and a little bubble bath to soothe you in the tub.
Bernie Tita wasn't about to be turned away.
Come in. Oh, it would be my pleasure.
I felt sorry for Marjorie. I really did.
And soon, Marjorie and Bernie were seen on the scene, the odd couple of Carthage.
We'd go to the Cherokee Club. We would go to the jalapeno tree here in Carthage.
Yeah, they were a pair.
And it wasn't long before Marjorie wanted more than a part-time dinner date, and Bernie complied.
She asked me to leave the funeral home. She just wanted more and more and more of me around.
She actually hired Bernie and paid him a salary.
There's this notion out there that you were attracted to Marjorie's money.
Yes, I'm aware of that. That was not part of the deal. That was not part of my wanting to be around Marjorie.
There's members of Marjorie's family that tell a different story.
Bernie Tita is what?
A thief.
Just 2 hours up the road in Dallas,
These are some of our old family photos of my grandmother.
3 proud granddaughters
Everything that has been said about her is not her.
have a very different take on just why Bernie was befriending Marjorie.
He saw her as a mark. He stole her money. When he was about to be found out, he shot her and killed her.
That's the real story.
That is the real story.
Is this case about money?
Yes, it is.
How so?
I think that defines everything.
The majestic gates swung open to a kingdom of riches, and Bernie Tita rolled right in.
I think the fatal mistake my grandmother made is she ended up buying a $30,000 headstone from Bernie Tita. From that moment, he marked her.
Within months of meeting at her husband's funeral, Bernie was full-time at Marjorie Nugent's eye-popping home.
Helping her with anything that she needed help with, make her coffee, make sure she was up, she was all right.
He was there for her.
They loved each other.
Yeah, Bernie loves everybody. And I think he's the one person in the world in that era who could feel that from Marge when no one else could.
I never thought of them as being lovey-doveys. Never. Just together, just friends.
I never saw him kiss.
You never did?
No.
And DA Danny Buck probably never would, because there was something about Bernie that made folks wonder back then.
I'm a gay man, and it's hard to be a gay man and being out in a small town.
Did Marjorie know you were gay?
We never discussed it.
Never discussed it?
No.
So what was the attraction? She's 42 years older than you?
Right.
He was targeting wealthy women.
Well, I think the attraction for Marjorie was the same as it was for everybody else in town. He was just a lovable guy. When you spend time with him, you want to hang out with him.
Less than a year after her husband's death, Bernie and Marjorie started hanging out big time, trading in the back roads for Broadway.
We'd go up on a Friday morning and then come back on Sunday. Saw Broadway shows. We had a lot of fun together.
Bernie Tita, the mortician who made about $24,000 a year, now had access to Marjorie Nugent's 10,000 square foot mansion in Carthage, her checkbook, and a world of opportunity.
They went on great adventures together.
Yo, wave hi. Hello.
They had a ball together. They traveled the world.
We went to Washington, Baltimore, and then took a cruise down the East Coast. We went to Germany, England, Scotland, and Wales. To Egypt, I went to the pyramids. We just went everywhere.
Was she having a good time?
She was having a great time.
He was her manservant.
Is it too busy?
The guy hired to take care of her every need. Clipped her toenails, all the nitty-gritty.
And for Bernie, the perks kept piling up. Marjorie showered him with cash, clothing, cars, even flying lessons, and planes to go with it. And in turn, Bernie gave gifts to the good people of Carthage.
He provided money, he provided scholarships.
Doing good, doing a lot of good in Carthage.
Turns out he was generous with Ms. Nugent's money.
He was kind of the conduit to her generosity, to her better angel.
She spoiled me rotten.
But the Nugents say their grandma never needed Bernie or anyone to teach her kindness.
My grandmother was a loving, sweet woman.
And she was kind?
She was. She was kind, and she loved telling stories.
This is really eye-opening, guys, to talk to you. This is really eye-opening.
In '93, we went there, and she opened the door, and she hugged me, and she kissed me like 8 times.
But whatever Marjorie's affection for her granddaughters, the stakes were about to change. Marjorie Nugent filed a new will, leaving everything to Bernie and nothing to her family.
Did you encourage her to do that?
No, she brought that to me one day, and it was in 1991.
Why would she do that?
Well, I felt like she could trust me, I guess.
It was on one of the next family visits to Carthage that the Nugent women got a hint of how deeply Bernie had moved into their grandmother's life.
Flash forward to 1994. We go to see her, and she opens the door, and she goes, "I don't know who you are." And I go, "What do you mean you don't know who we are?" And she goes, "I don't know who you are." She's like, "You need to leave."
And we went in, and there were pictures of Bernie everywhere. And we said, "Who is this? Nanny, who is this?" And she said, "Well, he's my friend." And the thing that disturbed me was that all of the pictures of my grandfather were gone.
For Shanna, Alexandria, and Susan, Grandma Marjorie's new behavior was disturbing.
She was like a schoolgirl in love.
And the motives of her new companion, deeply suspect.
We believe that my grandmother was in love with Bernie and believed that he was in love with her.
When was the last time you guys saw your grandmother alive?
That visit in 1994.
And now they worried that Bernie was well on the way to tricking Marjorie out of millions.
I think it's the perfect example of a sweetheart scam that I have ever seen. My grandmother believed he loved her.
How do you know that?
Because I saw her.
But Bernie tells a different story, claiming that after 5 years attending to Marjorie, the relationship had soured. And that even though he had his own modest home, he felt trapped by Marjorie and wanted out. Bernie claims Marjorie's 24/7 demands had turned into an abusive relationship.
She was very mean-spirited, very abrupt with me, very...
Could she be abusive?
Yes, very much so.
In some ways, was her place his gilded cage, and she closed the door on that cage?
Yeah.
We were in a heated discussion about, I told her, I said, I can't do this anymore. And I said, I can't be your friend anymore. I just can't do this.
Go ahead, desert me.
She was very distraught. You can't leave me. You're not going to leave me. No one has ever left me.
I know you hate me.
So I backed my car out of the garage, and by the time I got out there, she had locked the gate on me until I finally I said, okay, I won't leave you. I won't leave.
Well, just park your car, jump over the gate, run, or whatever. But Bernie is not one built for conflict. I think he takes it as his fate. I can't get away from this woman.
The door's right there, Bernie. But it's not as simple as that.
People get trapped.
People get trapped.
No exit, no way out. And at least according to Bernie, feeling like Marjorie Nugent's prisoner reminded him of the abuse he says he suffered as a boy.
And in some ways, did you feel trapped in this relationship just as you had been trapped with your uncle?
Yes. Yes, I did.
I think he is a killer. I think he has no remorse. I don't believe a word that comes out of the man's mouth.
Bernie Tita claims it pains him to recall how controlling and cantankerous Marjorie Nugent could be.
I don't like the things that she did, but I don't like talking about them either.
personally, and I think he's pure evil.
Let's move now to November 19th, 1996. Tell me about that day and what, from your perspective, led to the tragedy.
I had gone out to the house to make coffee early, 7:30. Got her up.
That's enough of that. I don't want you to talk about the shooting.
This is attorney Jody Cole. She would eventually become a big part of Bernie Tita's life.
This is all public records.
I do not want him to talk about the shooting.
And how his story would be told.
That's enough.
Yet when we spoke with Bernie, Jody Cole stopped him from telling those grisly details. Hard facts everyone from Carthage to Hollywood now knows.
Shot her in the back 4 times.
Shot her dead with this .22 caliber rifle.
The first bullet in her back makes her paralyzed, so she falls straight down onto the concrete. He shoots her again. He then walks straight up to her body, puts the muzzle to the gun to the back of her, and shoots it 2 more times.
Those graphic details would be missing from the movie.
I remember right before we shot that scene, I went up to Jack Black and I said, "Have you ever killed anyone in a movie?"
Like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was one of the hardest scenes in the movie. You see a scene like that in the script, and you circle it in the calendar when you're going to shoot that, and you think about it a lot.
Audrey, can you say something? Oh, no, Jesus, no, what have I done?
I'm sorry that that happened in my life. I caused the death of somebody that I loved.
Days turned into months as Bernie kept his awful secret. And Marjorie's family, they began to wonder what had become of Grandma.
I started asking my dad, have you heard from Nanny? I can't get her. And, maybe she's on another trip. She'll call you when she gets back.
And the Nugent women, all busy college students at the time,
This was Christmas. It's my grandparents.
admit there was a reluctance to reach out to Grandma Marjorie.
We had this strange encounter in 1994 where we didn't feel welcome.
And every Sunday he'd come sit right beside me and give me a full report on Margie.
And what were you thinking to yourself?
I'm thinking you're lying. That's what I'm thinking.
And I just made up one thing or another.
You told one she had Alzheimer's, another she was in the hospital.
It was such a difficult time.
And Mama would tell us what he had been saying. And it's like, Mama, are you crazy? He's either got her locked up in the house, poisoning her, or he's already killed her.
If I had gone to the police and then been proven wrong, I would have been left out of Carthage because people thought so much of Bernie.
So week after week, month after month passes, Marjorie's nowhere to be seen.
9 months. 9 months.
It was August 18th, 1997. The Nugents had finally shared their concerns with the local sheriff.
I get a call from my dad. He and I drive down. And it's clear that no one's been there for a very long time.
So, where was Marjorie Nugent?
I wanted to check the freezer. My grandmother was a child of the Depression, so you didn't waste food.
Turning back up the hallway.
So when Alexandria and the sheriff's deputies got to the house, she knew exactly where she wanted to go.
She walked down this hallway. Alexandria knew that if her grandmother had left the house, she would have put everything she kept in the refrigerator in a freezer located inside this pantry. She opened the door, and there it was.
It was so quick. It was like I walked in and I said, there's tape on the freezer.
And this is the freezer.
She untaped it and raised it up.
And threw the lid open.
And there was the top of Miss Nugent's head.
And I looked at my dad and I said, they found her. And he just kind of did this. And all I wanted at that moment was my mom.
Do I regret the fact that I didn't rush down there to stop him from doing this? Yes, because
That's what you do when you love someone and you find out that the person that they were in love with shot them 4 times in the back, and you think, how could I have saved them?
While a motive remained unclear, there was zero mystery about the prime suspect.
Bernie's name was top of the list.
Bernie was easy to find. He was right in Carthage, at home, when the sheriff's deputies showed up and brought him in for questioning.
I was so relieved when they came for me and arrested me. It felt like this big weight had been lifted off my shoulder.
How could you come to my house, eat my food, and sing hymns, and my cousin over there in the deep freeze?
It's grim when, you know, you see an old lady on video being pulled out of a freezer. Those are images that stay with you.
And I think it took 2 days to thaw her out and for them to do an autopsy.
Strange.
Yes.
That same day, Bernie Tita confessed to Panola County Sheriff's deputies that he murdered Marjorie Nugent.
There wasn't a question in anybody's mind. Everybody knew.
I think you're right.
Danny Buck Davidson would charge Bernie with first-degree premeditated murder and seek the ultimate penalty.
Life.
Life in prison.
Maximum sentence.
And that's when this twisted Texas tale really got strange.
People in the community were coming in saying Bernie was a real good guy. If he killed her, he had a reason for doing it. Poor Bernie. He had his groupies.
Bernie had his groupies?
Yep.
Some people are saying, hey, let him go. Some people are saying, no, put him away for life.
You just have never seen a story like this come across your desk, ever. And people still want to talk about it. They're still mystified about what really happened on that November afternoon that led Bernie to shoot her 4 times.
I'd stay in the garden with him.
Bernie Tita had preached and comforted and sang his way into this proud small town's everyday life.
He held a special place in the hearts of many people in Carthage, Texas.
Some folks even suggested Bernie was next door to the angels.
And I said, he's an angel, all right. He's an angel of death.
Your job as a prosecutor, you got a man who's admitted he put 4 bullets in the back of a little old lady.
Put her in a freezer and kept spending her money while she was dead.
And you have a community saying, leave him alone. That's,
right.
What would they say?
Go easy on Bernie.
It happened so often, he asked for a change of venue.
And he got one. The trial of Bernie Tita for murdering Marjorie Nugent was moved 50 miles away. And in February of 1999, Danny Buck told his tale to a jury who had never heard about Bernie.
I thought it was greed and betrayal. That's what I sold to the jury.
Bernie's defense was that he killed Marjorie in an act of passion, that her murder was not premeditated.
I don't know what happened that morning.
The jury did not relate to him. They related to me.
The trial lasted less than a week.
How long did it take this jury to make its decision?
I think it took them maybe 20 minutes to find him guilty.
9 years after he met Marjorie Nugent at her husband's funeral, Bernie was sentenced to life in prison.
Which is the top max sentence. And I felt pretty good about it.
I deserve time. I've done a particularly horrible thing, the worst thing in my life.
Case closed, except for this. Richard Linklater couldn't get the tale of Bernie Tita out of his head.
I ended up attending the trial and started thinking of this. Maybe there's a movie here.
Rick and Skip Hollingsworth wrote the Bernie screenplay and brought it to Jack Black.
And he said, hey, I never told you about this thing that I've been obsessed with, this story about this fella Bernie Tita. And so I said, let me read this thing.
Amazing
Jack Black became so intrigued, he agreed to play the lead role.
Action!
But not before he and Linklater paid a visit to a Texas maximum security prison to try and understand just who Bernie Tita really was.
I wanted to come and meet you. I still think it's important if I want to play a real person that I should meet you.
I'd love to be around people. I'm just a people person.
Black wanted to know what made Bernie tick, right down to what he felt in the days after he murdered Marjorie.
That must have been incredibly stressful.
Oh, good gracious.
That period with the walls closing in.
You have no earthly idea. It was absolutely horrendous.
If you're playing a person and you have access to them, you got to go see them. It's just one of the rules of the game.
I'm very appreciative of them coming to meet me.
And I have to stay here unless something changes.
Oh, there's one man in particular I can think of I'd sure like to talk to.
The movie Bernie also featured Matthew McConaughey as Danny Buck.
Danny Buck's coming to get you first.
Jack, Shirley, guys right over here, please.
In April 2012, it premiered in Rick's hometown of Austin. Critics loved it.
This idea that my grandmother was a monster is ludicrous.
The Nugent family thought it was beyond offensive.
It was a complete lie.
It was devastating to us. I mean, they took the most awful part of our lives and just laughed about it and joked about it.
It's like he had cast a spell over the entire area.
And now, the Bernie Tita story was about to take yet another bizarre twist that began right at the movie premiere.
A little feisty lady comes up to me and says, I bet there was some, crazy stuff going on at the trial.
She's appeals lawyer Jody Cole. And after watching the movie, she got a hunch that the trial of Bernie Tita had been a miscarriage of justice.
I want the world to know that Bernie Tita is a good person and that this outcome is unacceptable. I said, look at that, he snaps. And so I thought, why did he get a life sentence?
She asked Linklater if he had the transcripts from Tita's 1999 murder trial.
He came with his boxes of transcripts.
Put it on her desk and it's like, I don't know, have at it.
Jody pored over the files, knowing that Bernie's life sentence hinged on Danny Buck's argument that the murder was premeditated.
And within a couple of weeks, she had come to see me.
Is there a miracle that's about to occur?
Yes, and Jody Cole did a lot of work toward that miracle happening.
All rise.
Marjorie, are you okay?
That morning, I felt like I wasn't a part of the shooting.
16 years after he shot Marjorie Nugent dead, Bernie painted a picture for defense attorney Jody Cole about how he felt that awful morning.
I felt like I wasn't even there. And I have learned that that is called a dissociative episode.
I think it's a classic case of a kind of a disassociated moment.
That's what this whole case hinges on.
A dissociative episode. The new age psychological term would break the case against Bernie Tita wide open.
When they are overwhelmed with stress and emotion, they actually disassociate, which is leave their body.
And Bernie's body, the theory goes, killed Marjorie without his mind taking part.
And he shot her.
Yes, involuntarily.
The Nugent family would have their own take on Jody's ideas.
Not connected with reality.
Thoroughly confused.
This woman had been abusing him for a very long time, and his body acted in a way to end that abuse.
Bernie also confided in Jody what he says is his darkest secret about that childhood sexual abuse he claims he suffered at the hands of that uncle. Jody brought the findings to the DA, and he was sold.
What do you conclude in terms of why this murder occurred?
The child abuse and the abusive relationship. I think that he did not plan on killing her.
Danny Buck says if he had to do it all over again, he would have sought a much lighter sentence.
20 years would have been the maximum sentence. Not because Danny Buck wants 20, it's what the law says.
Danny Buck then went to bat for the killer he had once helped convict. And on May 6th, 2014,
Bernie Tity's life sentence thrown out.
A new sentencing trial is ordered, and Bernie is released from prison for the time being.
Lots of miracles have happened in my life.
The next miracle was in the parking lot.
Mr. Linklater picked me up, and we drove to Austin.
The real-life Bernie Tity just got out of an East Texas prison.
This is Bernie's little apartment. He lived down here.
He put me up in his apartment at his home.
In some ways, did Bernie become part of the family?
Yeah, very much.
I mean, did he ever babysit your kids?
Yeah.
In Austin, Bernie went about creating a new life, all on borrowed time. He joined the Gay Men's Choir.
In the time of King Herod,
he became a regular at Pastor Sid Hall's church.
Our folks surrounded him like mother hens, just loving him.
He was definitely feeling the ecstasy of freedom.
Well, my first thought is, how is this happening?
The Nugent granddaughters found it all beyond belief.
Richard Linklater.
Conned. But Richard Linklater is just as conned as my grandmother was.
I think I'm pretty unconnable.
I think Danny Buck got enthralled with Hollywood.
I'll say that's BS.
Before the sentencing trial, Danny Buck recused himself. He was replaced by two prosecutors determined to put Bernie Tita back behind bars.
This was just a straight-up execution. I think he's conned Hollywood and he's conned the whole judicial system.
Jane Starnes and Assistant Attorney General Lisa Tanner weren't buying it. Bernie didn't have a dissociative episode.
This case is about abusing elderly, vulnerable people. It's about abusing Marjorie Nugent financially, and it's about just cold-blooded murder.
What do we have in front of us here?
We have just small portions of the paper trail.
Lisa Tanner would allege Bernie regularly forged Marjorie Nugent's signature.
He was very good at signing her signature.
Manually manipulated her bank accounts.
This is what he showed Marjorie, but this is what he really deposited. We had 14 of these.
Altered her brokerage statements.
The original of this document is literally a cut and pasted, dummied up statement.
All of this.
He's pocketing her money.
Both while Marjorie was alive and after Bernie had killed her and stuffed her in her freezer.
The numbers ended up being approximately $3.8 million total.
Bernie's motive for murder came into focus.
He was about to be found out about.
In April 2016, after 2 years of freedom, Bernie Tita's new sentencing trial began.
Is the jury here and ready to go?
It was moved to Henderson, Texas, because Bernie still had so many friends and fans in Carthage.
We'll begin with the state. Ms. Tanner.
Lisa Tanner put Bernie in her sights.
This is a real case with a real murderer. He did that.
And Hollywood.
So we're going to talk about that in a non-fictionalized, non-Hollywoodized kind of way.
Hollywood means, lack of morality.
Thank you, guys.
But I took that really personal because I don't live in Hollywood. I'm an indie Texas director.
Rick Linklater was called to the stand to defend his friend.
I think he's an incredibly nice, generous man who, did a horrible thing.
The director and those who love Bernie argued he had paid his dues with time already served.
16 years? Yeah, I'd say he served enough time.
And Bernie's uncle, under oath, denied ever having molested Bernie.
You say never, never.
But did admit writing him a letter sexual in nature. Bernie did not testify at the trial.
I mean, there are just some questions that don't have any answers.
Two dramatic versions of Marjorie Nugent's murder have now been told. One on the big screen the other in a courtroom in Henderson, Texas. The question now is, who will the jurors believe?
Sudden passion, dissociative episode, snapping.
When he took that gun and pointed it down straight to the ground and put it in her back, that justified a life sentence then.
Bernie, are you a danger to society?
No, sir, not at all.
The jury goes out to deliberate. Alexandria, what's going through your mind?
You know, at that moment, all you can do is pray.
On April 2nd, 2016, some 26 years after he met Marjorie Nugent, the jury once again sentenced Bernie Tita to 99 years in prison.
For 99 years of life.
Everyone in that courtroom knew that my grandmother was not mean. She did not deserve to die, and that this man deserved to go away for the rest of his life.
When I heard 99 years, I mean, it was devastating.
He's back in prison for life. It's very discouraging.
Now, what's as certain as his life sentence is this. Deep in the heart of Texas, Bernie Tita is loved.
Even today, is there a Bernie Tita fan club in Carthage?
Yes. Not as big as it once was, but it's here.
I was out doing my patrols. We just started our shift that day. And I was driving down Sunset Boulevard, and I had received a call, a beige color car with no license plates, following this little girl.
In Los Angeles in 1968, 8-year-old Tally Shapiro was walking to school when a car pulled up alongside her.
A good Samaritan, a witness, sees the little girl, the little 8-year-old Tally, get in the car, thinks it's suspicious, follows him, and puts a call into LAPD.
Former Los Angeles police officer Chris Camacho reached the location and knocked on the door.
And I said, "Police officer, open the door, I need to talk to you." This male appeared at the door. I will always remember that face at that door. Very evil face. And he says, "I'm in the shower, I got to get dressed." And I told him, "Okay, you got 10 seconds. Finally, I kicked the door in. The image will be with me forever. We could see in the kitchen that there was a body on the floor, a lot of blood.
They say a picture says 1,000 words, and that image of those little white Mary Janes on that floor with that metal bar that he used to strangle her with. And that puddle of blood, it just looks like too much blood to come out of a tiny little 8-year-old like that.
There was no breathing. We all thought she was dead.
Camacho began frantically searching the house for her attacker. Moments later, he walked back into the kitchen and witnessed a miracle.
She was gagging and trying to breathe, and I thought, one for the good guys. She's going to make it.
Clinging to life, Tally was rushed to the hospital.
And it had it not been for that police officer, Tali Shapiro would have died on Rodney Alcala's kitchen floor.
We started searching the residence. There was a lot of photograph equipment, and all of us were amazed at the amount of photographs that he had there of young girls, very young girls. We found a lot of ID, picture ID of a Rodney Alcala. He was a student at UCLA.
The suspect, 25-year-old Rodney Alcala, had slipped through the officer's fingers.
When I kicked in the front door, the suspect went out the back door.
With Alcala in the wind, former detective Steve Hodel was grasping at thin air.
But we kept coming up empty. Back then, you know, we didn't have a lot of the forensics you have today. He was a snake charmer. I went and talked to his professor at UCLA. He says, Rod Alcala wouldn't hurt anybody. He's a great guy. He truly believed that, you know, and a lot of people did.
Rodney Alcala was born in San Antonio, Texas in 1943. His father abandoned the family when he was young. At 17, Alcala enlisted in the Army, but there were problems, allegations of sexual misconduct, a nervous breakdown. The Army discharged him.
The military realized in 1963 that they had him, that he was a sexual deviant.
In 1969, the FBI put Rodney Alcala on its most wanted list. But finding Alcala was going to be no simple matter.
Rodney Alcala, after raping and almost killing Tali Shapiro, he fled to New York. He made friends, he charmed people, he got into NYU film school.
None of his fellow students suspected that their popular classmate had a double life, which had the makings of a film itself, a horror film. 3 years after his attack on Tali Shapiro, Alcala's dark side once again emerged.
She had a beautiful face. She carried herself extremely sophisticatedly.
His next victim, Cornelia Michael Crilly, a 23-year-old flight attendant for TWA.
I was living with her temporarily while she was getting her own apartment ready around the corner to share with another stewardess.
Crilly had spent the day moving in. When Borstein came home from work, he was surprised to find her door locked, and no one answered the phone.
When her boyfriend was trying to reach her and was unable, the police came and a horrible scene.
Prosecutor Melissa Mortician was struck by the ferocious nature of the killing.
She had been stripped naked. She was strangled with a nylon stocking, and there was a bite mark on her breast.
Well, obviously, the cause of death is strangulation. She's bound, she's held. There's something stuffed in her mouth, obviously to keep her from screaming.
The police focused in on Cornelia's murder. But with almost 2,000 killings in New York in 1971, investigators could not close the case.
They had no real leads. We didn't have the forensic tools that we have today. So they did what they could, but it never went anyplace, and the case just went cold, and it stayed cold for 40 years.
Rodney Alcala wasn't even a suspect. After the murder, he changed his name to John Berger and moved to New Hampshire. He landed a job as a counselor at an arts and drama camp for girls. There, he made a lasting impression on the campers.
2 girls went to their local post office and they looked, and there was Rodney Alcala's photo on the FBI 10 Most Wanted list. And they looked up and said, "Oh my gosh, that's Mr. Berger."
They report it to the dean. He calls the authorities. They arrest him, take him into custody. I get a phone call from the FBI saying, we've got your man in custody. He's ready to be picked up.
Police in California were eager to charge him for Tali Shapiro's brutal assault, but her family had left the country. With no main witness, prosecutors had no choice but to offer Alcala a deal. Plead guilty to a lesser charge of child molestation and register as a sex offender. He took the deal, but the judge's sentence stunned those working the case.
He received 1 year to life, and the parole board let him go after 34 months after what he did to Tali Shapiro.
So less than 3 years later, Rodney Alcala was a free man again.
I was flabbergasted, to say the least. It just amazed me.
And Alcala had no trouble charming his way back into the swing of things.
He was hired by the Los Angeles Times to work as a typesetter. He took photos at weddings, and he was a registered sex offender during all of that, and nobody ever checked.
Even worse, he was chosen to be a contestant on the dating game.
It's the dating game.
The bachelor of its day. What no one knew was that Rodney Alcala was already a serial killer.
Please welcome Rodney Alcala.
From all outward appearances, Rodney Alcala was a handsome...
I'm called the Banana, and I look really good.
Charming, smart young man.
Well, I like bananas, so I'll take one.
Number one, bachelor number one, all right.
That wouldn't hurt a fly.
The woman who won a date with him ended up backing out, saying she found him creepy.
Come on, over here.
Her intuition probably saved her life. Others would not be so fortunate.
We'll never know how many women are lucky, because every woman that crossed that guy's path was a potential victim.
It was 1977. Rodney Alcala was out of prison and living in New York. Bad news for the New York cops, who already had their hands full. A homegrown serial killer known as Son of Sam was terrorizing the city.
He struck again over the weekend, the killer's 6th victim.
Police say they are nowhere near solving the case.
By this time, the Cornelia Crilly case had been cold for 6 years with no suspects. Rodney Alcala was only in the city a week before adding to the New York crime wave. His next victim, a 23-year-old musician and artist named Ellen Hover.
Ellen was a sweet, gentle soul.
Anita Feinberg and Ellen Hover met as teenagers.
Ellen was a very dear college friend. We roomed together for some time. She never confused what she had with who she was.
Ellen Hover came from a prominent show business family. Her father owned the famed Hollywood nightclub Sea Rose. Her godfathers were Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin.
Her mom called me and said, "Anita, have you heard from Ellen?" And I said, "No." She said, "Think hard. Nobody can find Ellen." And I didn't think anything of it until it hit the newspapers.
Her family's high profile made the story front page news as the NYPD kept up the hunt for her.
That detective did a great job for a missing persons case. There was a lot of calls. He did a lot of work, a lot of legwork.
Detectives thought they were onto something when they found an important clue in her apartment.
Ellen Hover had marked on her calendar that she was going to see someone named John Berger on the date that she disappeared.
Remember, Alcala had been using the name John Berger, but at the time, the connection was never made.
Her body wasn't found until a year later, buried on the grounds of the Phillips Memorial Hospital in Westchester, near the Rockefeller estate.
Until they actually found her, there was always the glimmer of hope. Once they found her body, that was it.
Ellen's body was so decomposed, police had to use dental records to identify her.
Based on the autopsy, they declared it a homicide. There was a suspect in the murder, a fellow that they believe was the last person that she was seen with.
Could that fellow have been Alcala? Ellen had written his alias, John Berger, in her calendar. Alcala, meanwhile, had left New York and was on his meandering road trip back to California.
He was constantly in predatory mode. That is behavior that involves hunting human beings. And that's part of a serial sexual killer. That is often as exciting as the actual homicide and sexual assault.
At the same time Rodney Alcala was on the road, a 29-year-old woman from Texas, Christine Ruth Thornton, was traveling through the West with her boyfriend. Her sister Kathy was 11 years younger.
Chris was a free spirit kind of gal, so she always was up for anything.
In the spring of 1977, Christine was heading to Montana with her boyfriend to pan for gold. And she had big news.
She let my mom know that she was going to be having a baby, and then nothing more was heard.
Kathy immediately feared the worst. Christine and her boyfriend had a stormy relationship.
She had been abused by him, we knew that. I always thought that he had done something to her.
Soon after Christine disappeared, Kathy began searching for answers. She undertook a systematic effort to track Christine and her boyfriend's whereabouts that would last almost 40 years, through marriage, motherhood, divorce, and a career. Kathy contacted police departments, federal agencies, hospitals, and kept copies of every phone call and letter.
This was a letter I sent to the FBI. I contacted the Department of Health and Human Services. They say a check at this address failed to reveal any contact with Christine Ruth Thornton. The Social Security Administration, I contacted them asking if there was any employment record, and there has never been any employment history. You know, I think the message was kind of clear. Everything was no, we don't know, we have nothing. Looking back through this, it's like, yeah, it was staring me in the face. She was not alive.
Kathy didn't know the name Rodney Alcala, but one day she would.
Hear more about the psychology of a sexual serial killer now on Facebook at 48 Hours.
It was the spring of 1979. Rodney Alcala had been back in California for almost 2 years, and a 12-year-old Robin Samso was enjoying the Southern California beach life.
We just lived to have fun.
Bridget Wilvert was Robin's best friend.
Everybody could be complaining about being bored, and me and Robin would find ourselves doing cartwheels and back walkovers.
The other love of Robin's life was her mom, Mary Ann.
She was probably the most loving child a mother could have. Everything she did to please me.
On June 20th, 1979, Robin was going to start her first day of work, answering phones at the ballet studio in exchange for lessons. But first, she planned to play on the beach for a few hours with Bridget.
I could definitely see a gentleman with dark hair. I mean, he honed in on us really like a shark in the water honing in on a seal. And he goes, "Can I take your girls' pictures?" And Robin goes, "Sure." And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, pops up Jackie Young, my neighbor. You know, she goes, Bridget, is everything okay? Are you girls all right? And man, he took that camera, turned his head down, and you could almost see like smoke coming off his dress shoes. He was gone.
Robin and Bridget turned to go back home.
And Robin had thrown her beach towel and everything into her bag, and she's like, well, I'm gonna get going. And I go, well, take my bike and don't stop.
That was the last time anyone saw Robin alive. Robin's ballet teacher called when she did not arrive for her lesson later that day. Her family immediately called 911.
It was probably the most horrifying time of all, you know, not knowing.
Police continually questioned the one person they thought might know where Robin could have gone, her best friend, Bridget.
And I said, I go, it was the man, that man that took our picture.
On July 2nd, 12 days after Robin last said goodbye to her friend and rode off on her bike, detectives found the body of a child.
I said, let's go see her. He said, we can't do that. I said, that's my baby. Of course I can see her. Why not? He said, because it took us 3 days to identify her. I said, what's wrong with you people? How many little girls with long blonde hair disappeared that it took you 3 days? He shook my shoulders, and the tears were coming down his face, too. He says, there was no hair.
A fire crew conducting routine fire prevention maintenance found Robin's remains in a remote location more than 40 miles from where she was last seen.
There were 12 days for the animals to scavenge Robin's remains. By the time the fire crew actually found her body, she was just bones.
The pressure was on to find the killer. Bridget's description resulted in this composite sketch, which was released to the media all over Southern California.
His parole officer saw that and called the detectives and said, look, there's a guy that used to be on my caseload. You really need to take a look at him. His name is Rodney Alcala.
It had been nearly 11 years since Alcala had left 8-year-old Tali Shapiro for dead. But Alcala was easy to find this time. He lived with his mother in Monterey Park, a stone's throw from the mountains where Robin's remains were located.
They learned that he had no alibi, that nobody could account for his whereabouts at the time.
He was the perfect suspect. Rodney Alcala was arrested on July 24th and charged with the kidnap and murder of Robin Samso. Detective Pat Ellis said Huntington Beach police got an unexpected tip when Alcala's sister came to visit her brother in jail. The conversation was being recorded.
At one point he mentions him having a storage locker in Seattle, Washington that the cops don't know about. He says, do me a favor, get the stuff out of there, get it cleared out.
But what Alcala didn't know was that police had found a receipt for the locker during a search of his home at the time of his arrest.
They beat her there, okay? And they get inside, and there's the mother load.
Hundreds, if not thousands, of these different images, and there are dozens upon dozens of these young women that in the pictures clearly are in positions of supreme vulnerability with Rodney Alcala.
Police learned Alcala had rented the storage facility and moved his belongings there 9 days after Robin Samso's remains were discovered.
Buried under all this stuff was this tiny little silk bag filled with earrings.
Alcala claimed those were his earrings, but when police showed the jewelry to Robin's mother, she recognized a pair of gold ball studs that she said Robin often borrowed.
So at that point, those are all the nuts and bolts that you need for a successful prosecution.
Nearly 1 year after Robin Samso's murder, prosecutors were ready. It was February 1980. Rodney Alcala went on trial.
Over the course of 2.5 months, there were almost 50 witnesses that testified. It was a very long, very difficult case.
The jury convicted Alcala and sentenced him to death.
It's a poor exchange for my daughter's life.
but maybe it'll save someone else's by him being gone.
But the relief would be short-lived.
Today, in a 5-1 decision, the California State Supreme Court ruled that Rodney Alcala did not receive a fair trial.
The jury had been improperly told about Alcala's prior sex crimes, including the attack on Tally. The decision would devastate Robin's mother, but the ordeal was just beginning.
You know, there's only one perpetrator, that little stone, but the ripples keep going. And there's victims and victims and victims and victims.
The Samso family was steadfast in the face of a second trial for the murder of Robin. They demanded justice.
And he killed my child, you know.
6 years after the first verdict, a clean-cut Rodney Alcala was convicted a second time. And again, the sentence was death.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Rodney James Alcala, guilty of the crime of felony.
Death. That's the only penalty that could ever be rendered in a case such as this.
Alcala had been on San Quentin's death row since 1980. Now, with a second conviction and a second death sentence, he was prepared to appeal all over again.
It was never really feeling safe that he was locked up because you always thought there was a chance he'd go free.
In 2001, 22 years after he killed Robin Samso, a federal appeals court overturned Rodney Alcala's sentence for a second time based on evidence he didn't get to present. There would be a new trial for Alcala, now in his 60s. For Robin Samso's family, it was unbearable.
We've gone through a lot of hell because of that animal. A lot of hell, a lot of hell.
The path to justice for Robin Samso would take almost a decade more. In New York City, 39 years since the murder of Cornelia Crilly and 33 years since Ellen Hover was killed, cold case detectives were finally able to identify Rodney Alcala as the killer of both women.
The strongest link was the fingerprint. There was a letter that was lodged underneath Cornelia Crilly's body, and there was a fingerprint developed from the outside of that envelope, which was unmatched for many years, and finally through the FBI's database, there was a match.
It was a significant piece of evidence, but not enough standing alone.
Equally incriminating was the evidence left on her body.
There was bite mark evidence where he had bitten her breast.
It's his dental impression is the one that's on her body.
And of course, we looked at all of his other cases to see similarities in sexual murders he had committed. We decided we had enough evidence.
In Ellen Hover's case, investigators now knew John Berger was Rodney Alcala, and he had been seen near the Rockefeller Estates where her body was found.
I think she was abducted here in Manhattan and ultimately killed up there.
We had a witness who saw somebody who looked like Rodney Alcala at that time period with a woman who looked like Ellen Hover. The man was carrying a camera bag, just like Alcala did.
But the Manhattan prosecutors would have to wait for California's third trial for Robin Samso's murder. In Orange County, Assistant DA Matt Murphy was ready to go to court when there was a stunning development. DNA linked Alcala to 3 Los Angeles murders: Jill Barkham, Georgia Wickstead, and Charlotte Lamb. The killing of a 4th LA woman, Jill Parento, was also tied to him.
Right at that moment, we realized that not only is Rodney Alcala a vicious murderer in our case, but in fact, he is the serial killer that we always suspected him to be.
In a highly unusual maneuver, the California prosecutors decide to try all 5 cases together. A bizarre-looking Rodney Alcala would serve as his own attorney.
On June the 20th, 1979, Robin Samso left Bridget Wilbert's apartment
There is no better forum than to be center stage in court as your own attorney, and you cross-examine the witnesses. You're like God in that courtroom.
Alcala even called Robin Samso's mother to the stand.
That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life, having him ask me questions.
Desperate to impeach Marianne's character, Alcala confronted her about how, during the first trial, she had reportedly brought a gun to court. She didn't deny it.
I was going to shoot him right between the eyes if I could have gotten a shot at him.
But then she felt Robin's presence.
All of a sudden, I smelled her shampoo. And I felt this warmth in my hand, and I couldn't get my hand out of my purse.
For the third time, Robin Samso's family waited as a jury decided Rodney Alcala's fate. This time, there were 4 other families waiting with them.
One of the many things that hurts me is that that was the last face she saw. And that bothers me because he's so ugly and he's so evil.
When the jury reached a verdict, it was a relief to the families who had been waiting for justice for so long. The Samsos hoped that this would finally be the end.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Rodney James Alcala, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree. Victim, Robin C. Samso.
Rodney Alcala absolutely 100% deserves to die for what he did.
In a separate penalty phase, the prosecution called to the stand a ghost from his past.
My name is Tali Shapiro. I'm one of Rodney Alcala's first victims and one of the only living victims. It should have stopped with me. Why in the world are there so many other victims when it was a known fact of what he did to me?
Rodney Alcala, addressing the same jury that convicted him of murder, makes an unusual plea for clemency.
Let me put the death penalty in perspective for you. If you desire to join in the killing of a human being, you and the families of the victims will have to wait at least 15 to 20 years while the case slowly churns through the appellate process.
He wanted to play an Arlo Guthrie song, Alice's Restaurant, and there's a part in that song where he talks about wanting to kill people. And he played that incredibly for the jury.
I want to kill. I want to kill. I want to see blood and gore and guts and brains and my teeth eat dead burnt bodies. I mean, kill, 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 kill. And I start...
Alcala's perverse closing argument did not sway the jury.
We, the jury, determine that the penalty to be imposed upon defendant Rodney James Alcala to be death.
Rodney Alcala had been on death row for more than 30 years. Now convicted of 5 murders, it was unlikely he could win another appeal. With the California cases settled, the New York prosecutors were ready for him, but they were not expecting what would happen next.
He came back to New York in June of 2012, and by December he pled guilty.
It was a surprise. It was a surprise that he pled guilty because he had denied every crime he was ever accused of.
Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. announced Alcala's sentence, 2 concurrent prison terms of 25 years to life.
For both families who had lost all hope that these cases would ever be solved, the pleas by Rodney Alcala and today's sentencing brings closure to painful chapters in their lives.
The judge cried during the sentencing, and Martha and I have been in this business for over 35 years each, and I've never seen a judge cry during a sentencing.
As was agreed upon, Alcala was returned to San Quentin's death row.
I got a telephone call from Robin Samso's mother, and she said she was so grateful that we were doing this. It's such a comfort to know that regardless of what might happen to the California cases, if for some reason he should get out, he's coming back to New York and he's going to serve 25 to life.
Both the New York and California prosecutors are haunted by the question, Are there other victims out there?
He crisscrossed the country, West Coast, East Coast, East Coast, West Coast, crossed through a lot of states, and I'm sure there are victims in those states.
They just have to be found.
How come she hasn't contacted us? That's not like her.
Rodney Alcala had been convicted of 7 murders and was facing 5 separate death penalties. Kathy Thornton, who had spent the last 39 years trying to track down her missing sister Christine, had never heard of Alcala. But her son did. It would change Kathy's quest forever.
The Killing Game, tonight's 48 Hours Mystery.
In 2013, Kathy's son had watched a 48-hour story on Alcala that led him to its website and a series of photos taken by Alcala of unidentified women.
I got an email from my son that said, I saw these pictures. Take a look if you'd like.
Kathy scrolled through the images. She kept stopping at one of them, a picture of a beautiful woman on the back of a motorcycle.
I said, yeah, that sure looks like Chris. And then I saw her little toe, her baby toe. And that's one thing I always remembered about Chris was her little baby toe was different. It hooked. I just saw that toe and I said, oh yeah, that's Chris.
Googling the name Rodney Alcala, Kathy's heart almost stopped. Kathy now believed her sister had been traveling with a notorious serial killer. Fearing the worst, but still wanting answers, Kathy submitted her own DNA to a national database of missing persons. If her sister's DNA was ever submitted, they could be matched. Hundreds of miles away, Jeff Sheeman, a Wyoming detective, was working on a very tough cold case.
They referred to my case as Granger Greta because it was an unidentified female that was found in Granger, Wyoming back in 1982. There were a lot of aerial photos and photos from the scene when the body was found.
It was a desolate area. County Prosecutor Daniel Aramaspi recalled his predecessors had tried everything to help identify the victim.
The skull was intact, and so the Wyoming State Crime Lab was able to have an artist come in and use the skull as a form of recreating what this victim looked like.
More than 30 years had passed without a lead. All Sheeman could do was study the old files with a new set of eyes.
The bones were found next to clothing. The bones had been pulled apart, presumably by scavengers, animals. She'd been out there about 5 to 6 years. It was the body of a 25 to 35-year-old female. They also told investigators at that time that she was also approximately 6 months pregnant.
Sheeman was blown away when he found the Wyoming Crime Lab had saved skin tissue and bone fragments.
And all we got to do is get the ball rolling with, send it to the proper authorities to start processing it for any DNA, specifically mitochondrial DNA.
That's DNA from the mother's side of the family. Siblings would be revealed as a match.
I honestly thought I would be 10, 20 years retired before I'd even receive a phone call saying they had identified her.
Less than a year later, Jeff got the miraculous news. There was a match between Kathy Thornton and the unidentified bones.
I believe there was a lot of luck that went into it, that went into this whole case. I believe that's what solved it, is a lot of luck.
After 39 years of searching, Kathy found Christine. Her hunt was finally over. And the story of what happened to her sister began to unravel. During the summer of 1977, Christine split with her boyfriend and had the tragic misfortune of meeting Rodney Alcala. Their trip through the lonely Granger Prairie would be Christine's last ride.
When you see that photo, there's no doubt that she was having fun. I think she just had no clue what he was thinking, what he was capable of doing. So I think you're happy up until the point where you're not. And at that point, there was no escape. Where would she go?
The location where the photo was taken to the location where Christine's remains were found were within probably just a few yards of each other.
I believe that Rodney Alcala killed Christine Thornton shortly after that photograph was taken.
But before he would indict Alcala for Chris Thornton's murder, prosecutor Era Mosby wanted to interview him. In September 2016, he flew with the two detectives to California. Frail and in ill health, Rodney Alcala had been moved from San Quentin to the medical unit of Corcoran Prison outside of Fresno.
When we first arrived at Corcoran, we talked to some of the security staff. They said that he was borderline dementia.
Whatever his condition, he was still being treated like the dangerous serial killer that he was.
We went through numerous doors, numerous gates to this peach-colored prison cell that looked like something off of a horror movie. Paint's coming off the walls, flies buzzing around.
Alcala's on a bed facing a wall. His feet were sticking out from underneath the sheets, and he had long toenails.
We started pulling out photographs of the crime scene. He took 2 seconds to look at that photo, and he said, "I know that area, that's my area."
How Alcala reacted to Christine's photograph was something the detectives will never forget.
It almost clicked like that with him, and you could almost tell that he was reliving that day.
Eventually, he took the photograph, set it on his lap, and he used his index finger and just started tracing her body for probably 5 minutes. And eventually, he sat the paper down flat, and he started tapping on the photograph of Christine, right over Christine's body, just tapping the photograph. And eventually, the tapping got louder and got louder. He eventually looked at me as he kept tapping on the photograph, and at that point, I honestly thought he would provide us more information about Christine.
But it was a game. Despite his age, his infirmity, his close to 40 years behind bars, Alcala was still the master manipulator he'd always been.
He was very even keel, the only time he would show any type of fervor in his voice would be when we would point blank ask him, "Did you kill her?" And he would say, no, you're crazy, you're stupid. And then when I asked him, was she alive when you left her? And he said, yes, she was alive when I left.
That's all the prosecutor really needed to hear.
The fact that he admitted he was there just cinched it for me. If he could deny killing her all he wants, but the fact that he admitted is, as far as I'm concerned, is a confession. I decided to charge him with first-degree murder.
There would be no extradition to Wyoming.
He's been in prison since 1979. Why should we give him a trip? A good place for Mr. Alcala is in the bed we left him in.
So Alcala was never tried for Christine's murder. But Kathy Thornton has finally learned what happened to her sister. Along with 7 other families, she has the answer to the question none of them ever wanted to ask.
How many others are there that, did the same thing Chris did?
I honestly believe in my mind, in my heart, that there's going to be other victims. Seeing how arrogant he is, knowing how charming he apparently was back in the day, and knowing how smart he is, I wouldn't doubt it if there's 100, 150, maybe even 200 victims out there.
I'm hoping that with this being back in the news, that someone might recognize someone in one of those photos like we did.
Help identify other possible victims online at 48hours.com. CBS Next. A mother of 3, alone in her home.
It was an execution. This was somebody who was there with a purpose.
A shadowy figure seen on camera puts a neighborhood on edge.
Were people scared that there was a killer loose?
Definitely.
48 Hours, primetime double feature, continues next on CBS.
You have a prepaid call from
Lyle Menendez. My name is Lyle Menendez. I'm at RJ Donovan State Prison in San Diego, California, and I am here for killing my parents. My brother and I were convicted together.
First-degree murder verdicts for both Eric and Lyle Menendez.
Excuse us. This is a special report from the Van Nuys Courthouse. Both Menendez brothers have been found guilty.
How big a deal was the Menendez case?
Well, when you think back, it was huge. The Menendez family was very wealthy. This was Beverly Hills. Murders just don't typically happen.
Kitty was my baby sister. There was a brutal murder.
Everyone from the gardener to the president had a view of what happened. I'm Jackie Lacey. I'm the former elected district attorney of Los Angeles County. A couple was sitting around watching TV when their adult sons came in with shotguns and slaughtered them. What did these parents do to deserve that? There must be a reason.
It's never been a case of guilt or innocence. It was always about why it happened.
Jose Menendez was the self-made millionaire. He was very driven, very demanding. The prosecution's theory was they got tired of their lives being micromanaged. They wanted to spend the money the way they wanted to spend the money. They were buying Rolex watches. They were buying real estate. The way that they acted was not like, oh my goodness, my parents are dead. It was soulless.
It was strictly greed from day one.
You believe they wanted a portion of the money?
They wanted it all.
My name is Cliff Gardner. I represent Eric and Lyle Menendez. It's not a complex case. It's a simple case. They were abused their whole life.
My dad had been molesting me. He raped me.
Did you ask him not to?
Yes.
The brothers were claiming that we were molested by our father. When we threatened to go public, they threatened to kill us, and so we had to go in and kill them before they killed us.
I thought he was going to kill me that night.
I never saw anything in the home, never. I have got to think that it was their attorney's ideas that if your only way you're going to save your ass is to say that you were molested, and that's what they did.
It's divided the family immensely. I love my cousins. They shouldn't have gone through what they went through. They're not lying. They were being abused.
As you sit there in prison, there is some news now that could really impact you and your brother's case, right?
Yes, that's pretty just sort of shocking.
Former Menudo singer Roy Rossello claims he was drugged and raped by Jose Menendez in the mid-'80s. Menudo had just signed with RCA Records, where Menendez was a top executive.
We now have evidence that makes absolutely clear that those boys were molested. And if those boys were molested, it would have been manslaughter, and they would be out.
The judge in this case, if he finds that the new evidence is credible and the conviction should be vacated, do you think the DA's office would seek a new trial?
I think they would spend a lot of time thinking about it.
34 years of incarceration. You wonder when will there be a fair review of this. So maybe now.
My hope in the case is that they'll finally walk out of prison.
Lyle and Eric Menendez had been behind bars in California for more than 3 decades for the 1989 killing of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. Convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison,
I really can't comment.
Can you say anything at all? In a case that captured the nation's attention. They had no hope of ever walking free. But new evidence may change that.
Eric chose not to speak with us for this broadcast, but Lyle did.
You have a prepaid call from
Lyle Menendez.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Hi, Lyle. Can you hear me?
Hi, yeah, I can hear you.
What did you think when you heard about these new claims and evidence?
I mean, for me, I just was happy. Just a burden to be telling what happened to and just have so much doubt in the public air.
The question is not whether the Menendez brothers killed their parents. They admit that they did. Instead, the focus of the case has long been why they did it. They insist that they killed out of fear and in self-defense after a lifetime of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse suffered at the hands of their parents. One of their lawyers, Cliff Gardner, says the new evidence corroborates those claims and lessens their culpability.
If the judge finds this evidence credible, I think it is sufficient to give them a new trial.
But to understand how we got here, we have to go back to the beginning, the evening of August 20th, 1989, when Lyle Menendez made this call to 911 from the family's Beverly Hills mansion.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, please.
What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
After officers responded to the scene, then 21-year-old Lyle and 18-year-old Eric reported that they had arrived home to find their parents shot to death in the family room. Jackie Lacey was a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles at the time.
I think one of the Beverly Hills detectives described it as one of the most brutal crime scene he had ever seen in his life.
I've been in this business for over 33 years, and I've heard of very few murders that were more savage than this one was.
Jose Menendez, a former top executive at RCA Records, and his wife, Kitty, had been shot multiple times at close range with a shotgun.
It was an expression of hatred for these two people.
And that was the last time I saw her alive.
Milton Anderson, Kitty's older brother, still remembers receiving the news.
My brother called me, and he said that Kitty and Jose were dead. I loved her. Sister Kitty was a very ambitious gal. She was a very beautiful woman.
Kitty and Jose met when they were in college in Illinois. Jose had come to the U.S. from Cuba. They went on to marry and start a family. Lyle and Eric were their only children. Over the years, with Kitty by his side, Jose excelled in his career, working for RCA Records, among other major companies.
He was going right up the ladder without any hesitation.
At the time of his death, Jose was working for a film studio, running their home video division. Investigators initially suspected that the killings may have been tied to his business dealings.
Lyle sort of indicated, you know, my dad dealt with shady characters. And once you say something like that, detectives are going to start to look at, okay, what were his business contacts?
Family members and investigators wondered whether it may have been mafia-related. At the time, the home video industry was known for having ties to the mob.
Everybody said it was a mob hit.
Because it was so brutal. It really was like a scene out of the Godfather movies.
Initially, Lyle and Eric Menendez were not even on investigators' radar.
They didn't do any gunshot residue test on their hands. They let them go back and get evidence without even thinking, hey, could it have been the kids?
But they didn't stay off investigators' radar for long. Their behavior in the wake of the crime eventually drew scrutiny. The brothers appeared to be spending their parents' money, and lots of it.
They were investing in businesses. They acted like they had won the lottery.
And their behavior at their parents' memorial services raised some eyebrows.
At the podium, Lyle read a letter from Jose that was filled with love and pride for his sons.
Did you see
Lyle get emotional as he was reading that letter?
No. Lyle also made a statement that his father always said, "You can never fill my shoes." And he jokingly said, "Guess what? I'm wearing my father's shoes today."
Struck you as odd that he would say something like that?
Was very odd.
While all that may have seemed unusual, it wasn't hard evidence. But then, about 6 months later, police got a tip from an unlikely source, the girlfriend of a psychologist who Lyle and Eric Menendez had been talking to. She told police that the brothers had confessed to the killings in therapy, and there was an audio-taped recording of it.
But for that confession, who knows whether they would ever been caught.
On March 8, 1990, after police got their hands on that tape, Lyle Menendez was taken into custody. Eric Menendez, who was out of the country at the time, surrendered to police days later.
Not many Hollywood murder mysteries ever took a more dramatic turn than police are describing in a couple of savage Beverly Hills killings.
Police say the motive was apparently money, a $14 million inheritance to be shared by the brothers.
But years later, when the case made its way to trial, the brothers would make it clear that it might not be so simple.
On August 20th, 1989, did you and your brother kill your mother and father? Why did you kill your parents?
Because we were afraid.
In the summer of 1993, nearly 4 years after Jose and Kitty Menendez were gunned down in their home, their sons Lyle and Eric Menendez went on trial. They faced the death penalty.
Good afternoon. The only question in this case is why did these killings occur? Why they were killed is what the focus of all of our evidence will be on.
What the defense was arguing was that since this was a self-defense case, the brothers were deserving of a lesser charge and punishment. The defense attorneys who tried the case didn't respond to our request for an interview. Cliff Gardner represents Lyle and Eric Menendez today.
They had the defense of imperfect self-defense.
Imperfect self-defense, meaning the brothers honestly believed that they had to take action to save their lives, even though it might not seem rational.
And if it's honest but unreasonable, you are culpable of manslaughter, not of murder.
Both brothers took the stand. Lyle Menendez spoke of sexual abuse at the hands of his mother and father. He said his father began sexually abusing him when he was only 6 years old.
He would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him.
Over time, he said, it became worse.
He raped me.
But while Lyle said his father stopped sexually abusing him when he was 8, Eric said it never ended for him, and that he finally confided in his older brother days before the crime at age 18.
I didn't know what to do at the time, so I figured I'd tell Lyle and maybe he could help me.
He started telling me that one of the reasons he had never told me before was because my dad had always threatened his life.
The brothers testified that Lyle soon confronted their parents, and that their mother indicated she knew about the abuse all along. In anger, Lyle said he directed a threat at his father.
I told him that I would tell everybody. Then he said, "We all make choices in life, son. Eric made his, you've made yours."
What did you think was going to happen?
I thought we were in danger. I thought he felt he had no choice.
But to what?
That he would kill us.
The brothers testified that they got into another argument with their parents on the night of the crime, and that they believed their parents were about to kill them to keep the family's secret from coming out. So they said they grabbed shotguns that they had bought 2 days earlier for protection, went into the family room, and started shooting their parents, at one point even stopping to reload.
And what did you do after you reloaded?
I ran around and shot my mom. The defense may call its next witness.
To bolster their claims of abuse, the defense called to the stand numerous relatives, friends, and acquaintances of the family who described incidents of physical and emotional abuse that they said they observed. Alan Anderson, Lyle and Eric's cousin, was one of those witnesses. Growing up, Alan would spend summers at the Menendez home. He had a lot to say about Jose.
Hitting the kids with the belt. Never had a problem with that.
And Kitty.
She wouldn't get up to console the children, nothing.
While none of the witnesses, including Alan, ever saw Lyle or Eric Menendez being sexually abused, Alan did recall something that struck him as odd.
Jose would tell the boys in the bedroom, and then he would close the door, and then he'd take showers with them.
He says during that time, Kitty wouldn't let him go near the room.
So I was not allowed, while the boys were alone with Jose, with the door closed, in the master bedroom, to go down the hall to probably not hear whatever I may hear.
Another cousin, Diane Vandermolen, gave similar testimony. And she also recounted a conversation she says she had with Lyle when he was 8.
He proceeded to indicate to me by touching himself down and saying that his dad and him had been touching each other down there.
And what did you do?
I went and got Kitty and told her what was going on.
And what happened when Kitty came down?
She didn't believe me.
Andy Cano, yet another cousin, also took the stand and testified about a conversation he says he had with Eric when Eric was about 13.
He told me his father was massaging his. He told me never to reveal it to anybody.
Still, prosecutors argued that even if Lyle and Eric Menendez were abused, it doesn't give them the right to kill. And they pointed out that when the brothers confessed to that psychologist, they never mentioned abuse or self-defense then.
The timing of disclosure was convenient.
The prosecutors who tried the case didn't respond to our request for an interview. Former Los Angeles County DA Jackie Lacey reviewed portions of the trial at our request.
And people do make things up when their life is on the line.
But all these years later, Lyle Menendez maintains they are telling the truth. And the reason they didn't come forward then was complicated.
What was holding you back?
Just shame, just not wanting it to be public.
The pure nature of the crime, however, says Lacey, doesn't support the brothers' claim that they acted in self-defense. Prosecutors pointed out that Jose and Kitty were watching TV at the time they were killed, and they weren't armed.
In order to get close enough to blow somebody away, you would have been able to see that they didn't have weapons.
Lyle Menendez is adamant that he and his brother were in fear for their lives.
For me, it was just dark and confusing and total belief that there was danger. You know, it's fight or flight to a degree. It was panic.
The prosecution argued the evidence proves the killings were premeditated. When the brothers purchased those shotguns, prosecutors said that they took steps to cover their tracks, like driving to a gun store all the way in San Diego.
San Diego's not a round-the-corner drive. Last time I checked, it was 2 hours sometimes. After they killed their parents, they went around and picked up the expended shotgun shell casings so that their fingerprints wouldn't be discovered on those shells. There was a lot of thought and a lot of deliberation that went into it.
They also got rid of the shotguns, made that 911 call.
Who is the person that was shot? My mom and my dad.
And misled the initial investigators. Prosecutors pointed to money as the motive. They said Jose Menendez told his sons he had removed them from his will, and based on their investigation, they suggested that after the crime, Lyle Menendez attempted to destroy a will on the family computer. Lyle denies doing that and insists money had nothing to do with what happened. If there was a new will, it was never found.
We never had any financial problems with my parents.
Although the brothers were tried together, there were two separate juries deciding their fate. When deliberations began, they stretched on for weeks before both juries determined they were divided over whether Lyle and Eric Menendez should be convicted of murder or manslaughter.
Therefore, I find that the jury is hopelessly deadlocked.
A mistrial was declared.
It was just a devastating result. I needed it to be over, one way or the other.
But it was far from over. Prosecutors would try the case again.
They needed a win. The heat was on.
Nearly 2 years passed as Lyle and Eric Menendez sat in jail, awaiting a second trial. Some of their family members, like Alan Anderson, believed that they were justified in the killings,
I know they did what they did because they were in fear of their life.
while others, like Kitty's brother, Milton Anderson, considered them cold-blooded killers.
I don't believe that Jose or Kitty would do any of the things that they were accused of. Jose was changing his will, and that's when they went out and bought the shotguns.
At the retrial, which began in October 1995, one jury instead of two would hear the case. No video cameras were allowed in court, and a new team of prosecutors would employ a different strategy.
The first trial was, okay, there may have been abuse, but we don't allow vigilantes in our society. The second trial, the prosecution's case, there was no abuse at all.
And what made it easier for prosecutors to argue that, says attorney Cliff Gardner, is the fact that the prosecution raised new and successful objections to the admission of a large amount of defense evidence. Now the jury would hear from only some, not all, of the witnesses who knew the Menendez family and helped corroborate the brothers' claims of abuse.
The DA was not going to take another loss. They could not take another loss.
The judge, who had also presided over the first trial, excluded the testimony on the grounds that it was irrelevant, repetitive, and in some instances, lacking in foundation, because this time, Lyle Menendez would not take the stand.
Eric did testify. Why did you decide not to speak?
For 2 reasons. I was just done after the first trial, and I didn't have the attorney that I trusted so much to ask me these deep personal questions.
But Carol Nahara, the only surviving lead prosecutor from the second trial, who declined to speak with us, suggested in a 1996 interview there might have been another reason why Lyle didn't take the stand.
There were things that had been developed since the first trial that would have damaged his credibility a great deal.
Prosecutors said they had new evidence that Lyle had asked a friend and a former girlfriend to fabricate testimony. Lyle admits to 48 Hours that he did do that, but says he later withdrew those requests. Because Lyle didn't take the stand, his cousin Diane Vandermolen was prohibited from testifying about that conversation she says she had with Lyle when he was 8, in which she says Lyle told her that his father was touching him. The jury did still hear from cousin Andy Cano about that similar conversation he claimed to have had with a 13-year-old Eric, but the prosecution attacked his credibility.
The state's position was that Andy was a liar.
And when cousin Alan Anderson took the stand, prosecutors attacked his credibility too, bringing up the fact that Lyle Menendez gave him money after the crime. Anderson says it was to help pay for a medical procedure.
He didn't say anything like, well, if I go to court, it was just straight up between him and I, him being a nice cousin, knowing I was in financial bind. He knew he had the resources to help me.
At the second trial, prosecutors placed more of a focus on the brutality of the crime, and they painted Jose as a restrained, loving father, someone incapable of molesting his children. Prosecutors referred to the brothers' defense as the abuse excuse. In the first trial, the defense called more than 50 witnesses. This time, they called about half.
It wasn't that they didn't want to present them. They were not allowed.
The jury deliberated for days, and then
The verdicts are in the retrial of Eric and Lyle Menendez.
Guilty of first-degree murder.
I hugged my brother, we cried, and I said, look, we're going to be okay.
I was not happy at all.
At the jury's recommendation, the brothers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And you believe they deserved that?
Oh, what they did to my sister, they should have gotten a death penalty.
Lyle and Eric Menendez were sent to separate prisons. More than 2 decades passed, and then around 2020, the case made a surprising resurgence on social media. Following a documentary that aired on the case in which Eric Menendez repeated his claims of abuse, droves of people took to TikTok and Instagram to express support for him and his brother. Dr. Judy Ho is a neuropsychologist who specializes in childhood sex abuse trauma. Dr. Ho is also a 48 Hours consultant. We asked her to review the case.
I definitely think that our society has just become more knowledgeable about trauma and the impact of sexual trauma.
Dr. Ho says research shows that just because the brothers delayed reporting abuse, it doesn't mean they made it up.
That's all very consistent with people who have been through trauma and maybe feel like it was even their own fault in some ways, or they're ashamed of the trauma. And there's a lot more self-stigma and shame associated with male victims.
She also says that the abuse the brothers describe could even help explain why the crime was so brutal.
It makes sense that in that moment, it's almost like a breakdown. And that's not to make an excuse for anything that they've done, but it's just to describe the state of mind of this is years and years of abuse where they couldn't act to protect themselves. And once they pulled the trigger, it was like there was no turning back.
But could Lyle and Eric Menendez have truly been in fear for their lives that night?
They're 18 and 21. Why couldn't they leave?
Right. Well, certainly there was a path that they could have taken is to try to get away from the family. But it sounds like even at that age, they were very much under the control of their father still. I think that oftentimes what people are not aware of is that trauma completely rewires the brain. They probably did think at one point it was either them or their parents, that it was a fight or flight conditioning that had come up.
Attorney Cliff Gardner believes the case would be tried differently today.
The idea back then was, A, dads don't molest their children. And if by chance it happened, these are 18 and 21-year-old kids, they're strapping young men, they just leave. And both those, I think, are undercut in what we know today.
Still, a better understanding of the effects of sexual abuse and some social media support would do little on their own to make a difference in the brothers' case legally. Instead, what their defense needed was new evidence. And eventually, that's what it got.
Did you or Eric think that another person would accuse your father of child molestation?
I did not. I could not believe it.
Over the years, Lyle and Eric Menendez appealed their convictions, but were unsuccessful. It seemed unlikely that they would ever see beyond prison walls. But then new evidence began to surface. The first piece, in the form of a letter.
Just kind of out of the blue, one of my father's sister found a letter in storage.
Appellate attorney Cliff Gardner says the letter was written by Eric Menendez to his cousin, Andy Cano, in December 1988, about 8 months before the crime.
It's not dated, but you were able to get a frame of reference of the timing of it based on the contents of the letter.
Exactly. He talks about the Christmas party. We know the Christmas party that they put on was in Christmas of '88. He talks about hiring a new tennis coach. So there's a number of things in the letter that allow us to authenticate when it was written.
And it's a particular section of the letter that Gardner says is key.
He says, I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I'm afraid. He's crazy. He's warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle. No one knew about it at trial. It was never presented.
Remember, Andy Cano did testify at both trials. He said that Eric Menendez, at age 13, confided in him that his dad had been touching him. Prosecutors suggested that Cano was lying.
He explained to me that these massages that his father was giving him were beginning to hurt.
The letter is significant. Why?
Well, the state's position was that Andy was a liar. Andy was making it up. This shows that Andy wasn't making it up. It's contemporaneous evidence from Eric to his cousin Andy about what was happening.
But the letter was just the beginning. More evidence has surfaced that Gardner says further supports Lyle and Eric Menendez's long-standing claims that they were sexually abused. A man named Roy Rossello has come forward claiming that he was sexually abused by Jose Menendez, too.
Roy was a member of the boy band Menudo, which was big in the late 70s, mid 80s.
They're a sensation in the Spanish-speaking world, and throughout Latin America, their appeal has caught on big.
Menudo originated in Puerto Rico. The band is best known for producing big-name talent like singer Ricky Martin. The idea behind the band was to keep it perpetually young. Few of the performers remained in the group beyond the age of 16, instead being rotated out for younger talent. It turns out Jose Menendez had ties to the group.
Jose Menendez was working at RCA at the time, and RCA signed Menudo to a recording contract.
Former Menudo member Roy Rossello, now 54, was not available for an interview with 48 Hours. But in a sworn affidavit filed just last year, he claims he went to Jose Menendez's home in the early 80s at the direction of the band's then manager, Edgardo Diaz. Rossello would have been between 14 and 15 years old at the time. He says he drank a glass of wine, then felt like he had no control over his body. He says Jose Menendez took him to a room and raped him. Rossello first spoke publicly about the allegations in a documentary.
Y yo estuve una semana con un dolor terrible. Con un dolor que no podía más, no me podía ni mover.
Rossello also alleges that he was sexually abused by Jose Menendez on 2 other occasions, right before and right after a performance at Radio City Music Hall in New York.
I met Roy, and he talked to me about it. It was a difficult conversation for him. It was difficult for me to hear, but I thought Roy was credible. It can take years for people to recognize what happened, to have the courage to come forward.
When I first heard it, I cried. For me, it was very meaningful to just have things come out that caused people to really realize, okay, at least this part of what it's about is true.
Lyle Menendez says he remembers Menudo band members coming over to the family home when they lived in New Jersey before moving to Beverly Hills. He does not recall Rossello specifically.
What do you remember about the Menudo band members going to your home?
Only that my father had sort of intimate involvement with that particular group. They usually would not have too much involvement with groups other than negotiations. But with Menudo and Eduardo Diaz, he traveled with them, he went to their concerts, he stayed in hotels that they stayed at.
Lyle Menendez says he didn't think much of it until rumors began surfacing towards the end of he and his brother's first trial.
People in the industry were talking about that maybe something had happened because there was a sex scandal in the group.
Rossello, along with other former Menudo members, have long accused Edgardo Diaz, the band's one-time manager, of sexual abuse. Diaz has always denied the allegations, and no charges have been filed against him. The Los Angeles Police Department recently investigated a specific incident in which Rossello alleged Diaz raped him at this hotel in the 1980s. The LA County DA's office is now reviewing the case. But what does this new evidence mean in terms of Lyle and Eric Menendez's case?
Importance of the new evidence, you have to look back and understand what the state's position was at the second trial. The state's position was that the sexual abuse never happened. And the state's position as to Jose Menendez was he wasn't the type of person who would molest a young boy. This new evidence takes both those arguments and undercuts them entirely.
Gardner has filed a habeas petition asking that his client's convictions be vacated.
The boys were abused as children. They were abused their whole life. And this is a manslaughter case, not a murder case. It's just that simple.
And if they were convicted of manslaughter, they would have received a much shorter sentence and been out a long time ago. But will a judge buy Gardner's argument?
It is very, very possible that Jose Menendez was a child molester, but you don't get to murder him and his wife in cold blood.
What do you make of the new evidence? To see a timeline of how the case unfolded, go to 48hours.com.
After attorney Cliff Gardner filed the habeas petition in May 2023, asking that Lyle and Eric Menendez convictions be vacated, it turned into a waiting game for a judge to rule. We asked former DA Jackie Lacey what she makes of the new evidence, starting with that letter, the one that appears to have been written by Eric Menendez to his cousin Andy Cano months before the crime.
The interesting thing about the letter is that there are only two people who can authenticate it, Andy Cano and Eric Menendez.
Andy Cano died in 2003, and Lacey points out that he never mentioned the letter when he testified.
You would think when Andy was on the stand twice, he'd have brought that up. And oh yeah, he told me about it recently, and here's the letter.
The timing of that letter, though, you are able to sort of pin down because you know it was the holidays, because he writes about his Christmas plans.
But Natalie, look at it another way. You could include those details and get that letter together after they were caught. This letter, for all we know, could have been written by Eric Menendez shortly after the murder, given to Cano, and Cano may have gotten cold feet about it and not submitted it.
But Gardner argues the new evidence is sound. He says the reason the letter was not brought up at trial is likely because Eric Menendez and Andy Cano forgot about it.
If you look at the letter, it's not just about what Jose's been doing. It's about all sorts of other things. It was just one of many letters that they wrote to each other. There really shouldn't be any doubt about the authenticity of the letter.
And as for Roy Rossello, the former Menudo band member,
can you discount his claims altogether?
No, I think what the judge has to weigh and consider is this newly discovered evidence that would have changed the verdict?
And Lacey says she does not believe it would have.
They're still stuck with the planning, the cover-up, the money that they spent afterwards. I think that you could argue the sexual abuse occurred. On the other hand, at the moment these men are driving down to San Diego, paying for the murder weapons, coming back and waiting for an opportune time to go in and kill their parents. The molestation is not occurring right then. I do not believe that at the time they murdered them, that they were in danger at that particular minute of being murdered by those people. I think they hated them. They might have had a good reason to hate them, but we can't condone vigilantism. When you calmly and logically looked at the facts surrounding the killing, it's a murder.
But Gardner believes the new evidence would have made a difference to the jurors. He says evidence of abuse can mitigate a crime, and that's why prosecutors fought so hard to keep it out of the second trial.
Sexual abuse, physical abuse is relevant to your state of mind, and state of mind is the key in determining whether something's murder or whether something's manslaughter. What this evidence does is it puts you back in the situation that they were in with the first trial, that there was corroboration for the abuse.
And in the first trial, remember, 2 juries were divided over whether the brothers should have been convicted of murder or manslaughter.
The court declares a mistrial.
Gardner thinks this new evidence, combined with that of the first trial, rules out murder entirely.
My hope in the case is that the judge will realize that this new evidence is indeed credible and persuasive, and he'll vacate the convictions.
If that happens, it would be up to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office whether to retry the case. In a statement, the District Attorney's Office said it is investigating the claims made in the habeas petition. Alan Anderson wants to see his cousins released.
What I would say to the prosecutor or the judge would be, please, look at all of the evidence. They are speaking the truth. They shouldn't be in there as long as they've been.
But still, Kitty Menendez's brother, Milton Anderson, feels just the opposite. He says he doesn't believe the new evidence is credible.
I don't think it's evidence.
And he wants his nephews to stay put.
I think they should die of old age in prison. I loved my sister and I protected her in life, and I will love my sister and protect her in her death.
Lyle Menendez says he understands his uncle's pain.
Part of my remorse is for the pain I caused people like him.
As they await a judge's decision, Lyle and Eric Menendez, who reside in the same prison since 2018, are focused on rehabilitation and continuing their education.
I connect with other prisoners that have sex abuse histories and work with them.
Both brothers are married to women outside prison.
I think it has made a huge difference to have love and support like that. I try not to be defined by that one night. It's sort of a lifelong journey. Not to be defined by that one night.
New CBS Next. A former state trooper's wife found dead in her bathtub.
It was a gunshot.
But was it a cover-up for murder?
Dan thought he was smart enough to trick everybody.
The packed duffel bag.
Wet towels, it looks odd.
A new 48 Hours, next on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.